Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Model. Beyond the Model is a community for machine learning professionals, people that admire machine learning, people that want to know more about machine learning and AI globally, run by the team here at Strativ. I'm Kieran Haynes. I'm your host today, and I'm joined by Nikhil Haas. Nikhil, it's great to have you here. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure and a long time coming as well. So, we're going to talk about a lot today, and as is the theme with the episodes that I've done, we're going to be talking about where machine learning intersects with biology or the life sciences, and in this case, drug discovery and some of the tools used around to do that. So Nikhil is the co-founder and CEO of a company called BioLM, which he's going to tell us all about, and we're going to get into some conversation there because it's really exciting what the team there are doing. But for now, let's get into it. Nikhil, why don't you introduce yourself, give us a bit of background about your career, and set some context for people?
Sure. First of all, thank you again. My name is Nikhil Haas. My undergraduate degree is in biomedical engineering from Boston University. I did my tissue engineering research across the river at HST MIT. I also have a master's in health informatics and data science from University of San Francisco. Around that time, I was also fortunate enough to do some computational work in the identification of T cell specificity and phenotypic markers with Mark Davis's lab at Stanford and Jacob Glanville from Distributed Bio. As far as other academics go, I've also been an adjunct professor teaching master's courses in semantic data, semantic organization of data and ontologies, as well as EDA. I've really focused my career on the intersection of the things that you talked about, computational biology, data science, and scalable software engineering to solve real world problems in biotech and synbios. So I've worked at places like Biorad Laboratories, manager of data and analytics, and prior to starting BioLM, I joined Twist Bioscience as an early engineer and worked on a number of things from biosecurity to cloning vector onboarding to order intake to exome projects and library pools. So really got a lot of exposure. I was there a couple of years prior to IPO and then a few years after IPO. And when I left Twist, I was leading the AI and tech development team in Twist Biopharma, doing things like affinity maturation, optimization of leads, de novo candidate generation, using machine learning and language models, in the early 2020s.
Awesome, thank you. Just as a quick side note as well, this is probably the same for everybody that will do this series with me. But I talk to people about how interesting it is to be a part of just machine learning. I don't know, post ResNet into Transformer sort of era from 2014 up until now. But it must be a real privilege. It depends which way you look at it, but it must be a real privilege to intersect biology and machine learning at like the pivotal point, right? So that must have been quite exciting, just having your career growing that way.
I think it's very exciting, which is maybe why I stay in it. In fact, when you're able to solve like a real business need with AI and machine learning, it's not this academic exercise. You can actually see growth of a company, you're saving money, maybe creating a new product. You're always building something new, and so yeah, it's certainly an exciting field to be in.
Awesome. And so, BioLM, tell us what's BioLM?
Oh, great. Thank you. So, we started BioLM because we really saw a need for biotech companies to be helped by somebody that has had a foot in both doors, both the AI as well as the wet lab and biology. There are a number of companies out there producing tooling for language models, protein language models, but it's really not enough to get a lot of companies there to solve their business needs and challenges. So while we do ourselves have our own SaaS platform, we leverage that for our professional services, where we help typically small biotech companies answer the question, can AI help with what I'm doing? And if so, how do I get that in an efficient, cost-effective manner?
Firstly, let me start. How's that been? That must be a bit of ride.
It's been exciting. I'm a startup guy. This is my third startup, I would
Yeah.
say. It's the second one that I've co-founded, and when I joined Twist, it was certainly a startup. There were, just a couple dozen people, and when I left, there were over 1,000. So
Yeah.
I migrate towards startups. Even Twist Biopharma was a smaller company within Twist Bioscience, and when Twist Bioscience grew and all of the processes were sort of kind of in place, I was able to jump and move over to Twist Biopharma and help sort of get that started, get that AI team going. So yeah, for me, it's definitely exciting. It's what I do. It's one of the first times that I've done fundraising, so that's
Yeah.
been new. And founder-led sales has also been new, but very exciting and very
Yeah.
rewarding at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on something as well. What I think fundamentally what BioLM are trying to do, which is answer the question of, well, can AI help us with these oftentimes smaller biotechs? And I think from the outside in, and I have to make this very explicit. I'm not a machine learning engineer or scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but given that I've worked in this area for such a long time, it immediately for me, you must think, yes, of course it can help you, right? If there's loads of value it can bring to even these smaller companies, but there's a lot of problems with that, isn't there? And I suppose my question is like, what problems are you solving for these companies, and how are you solving them?
So, I think the Benchling State of Tech in Biopharma report that came out earlier this year is a sort of a really great example and highlights some of the issues that smaller companies in particular are having. And this is one of the reasons why we started BioLM, by the way, is because we noticed that, oh, hey, we need a bioinformatics person, we need a DevOps person, we need a machine learning engineer, we need a data scientist, and all these sort of multidisciplinary people and in order to get things done, and then also translate that to the wet lab, like it's not just something that a small company can go and pick up and do, right? They don't have the ability to hire this large team. If they did, would they have an ongoing project to give to that team continuously, or would they have to, let them go after their first model is built? Um, y- you know, and smaller companies are really more cash strapped, right? And so they're thinking about their milestones, whether or not they can sort of take this risk on AI, something that they haven't used before, or whether or not they should continue doing what they're doing, like say rational design and things like that. So, um, for smaller companies to try and get AI today, there's really a couple of options for them. They can try and do it themselves with SaaS for cheap, which is not going to be terribly effective. Or they can try to hire, which they usually don't have the money for to build that team or the expertise to build that team even. Or they can try and do a partnership with one of the larger AI sort of wet lab tech bio companies. And most of those have hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. They have some of their own wet labs, big teams, and those projects come with huge price tags and commitments, on the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So really, these companies don't have any option. And so our professional services provides a way to give them access to AI, do the projects that they need to get done for their unique science, their unique company and business, and then kind of have that problem solved, right? And so that's kind of in summary the main process issue and the main way that we're solving that challenge.
For anybody that's not, intimately familiar with hiring and building a machine learning team and all of the parts that come with that, as you mentioned. For a lot of these companies, this is an existential risk, isn't it? You get it wrong, and that can have, it can affect the company's existence, right? Because this is like a really expensive bet. So being able to give people access to that must be big, and that must be really exciting for a lot of the companies that want to do it.
It's really huge. Actually, a lot of the startups that we deal with, the things that they say is like, hey, we really want to do this right now, but we're going to focus on our core tech and wait until we have our next funding milestone before investing in AI because they're not sure about taking the risk.
Right.
And where we come in is, we say, hey, what if we can help you get that next funding milestone with AI? It shouldn't be something that you're like waiting till you get more money to
Yeah.
spend on it. It should be something that you need that advantage now more than anything, especially compared to these larger companies, right? So it's been really rewarding. We've been able to help startup companies actually, discover new molecules or optimize existing molecules and actually get that next step and round of funding by doing things a lot faster and more cheaply with AI-based design.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's a really good point as well about the actually achieving funding. Like we can give you that capacity to get that funding. We can help you get there. We can help you, bring sort of achieve these goals. And I see it a lot, by the way, as well. Companies say to me personally, "Hey, we want to hire this person, but we need to wait. But we also kind of need to hire them to do the funding." So it puts us in a tough situation, and I guess that solves a massive problem for them. And the second part of the question was, so that's the problem. So talk to me about the how. How are you solving this problem for them? Like what talk to me about the platform. What does it do, and how does it help these guys get that?
Yeah, so when we started the company, we really started on the basis of the platform. How do we
Right.
step back and say, the models of today are really different than the ones of the 2010s. They enable us to do machine learning with less data. Most of them require GPUs, they're more expensive, but we can get better results, et cetera, et cetera. So, we stepped back and created a platform that allowed us to fine tune, host, scale up bio AI models and biosequence models, molecular structure models, in order to do this work quickly and cost effectively. Right? And so we leverage the platform for our professional services. So we're able to do that work quickly, like I said, quickly and cost effectively, and really focus on what is the business need of the company that we're helping, and trying to solve that problem. It's not an academic exercise of like, let's try and put every model up there on the platform, or what's the best model to, by 1% performance. It's like, we need to save the company money in some specific way. Like, how do we do that? It's not, you really have to focus on that business need. And so,
Yeah.
that's how we do it with the platform. But as far as the way that we engage with companies, we really find it's best to have a workshop with them and figure out their goals and needs, both from a scientific standpoint as well as from a company standpoint, before proposing a project. So we work with companies, to put together a proposal that's right for them based on their time, energy, costs, commitments, expectation, and things like that, before proposing a modeling for their specific unique science.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. The just how important. I mean, money's money, right? But the commerciality, you know, I think that gets lost in there. We talk about AI sometimes, right? You forget how expensive it is, and being able to be super cost effective in that way, it's big as well. And um,
Oh yeah,
it
GPUs are
brings
expensive.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I think we showed a client once, we were like, this is by the way, we spent $50,000 generating these sequences, and they were just like, oh my God. So now we actually provide in our some of the documentation in our proposals includes cost estimates for some of the top bio AI models. So we actually went into the papers and we said, we looked at how long they trained for, what GPUs they trained for, and then we plugged in the numbers and said, if you train this in the cloud, it would cost such and such, right? And so we really need to open scientists' eyes to how much this stuff costs, and make people aware that it's not just like a solution for everything, right? You're not just gonna switch over spending money on a labor to say a model if it costs the same amount of money, right? It's kind of silly. So yeah.
yeah. I hope it will improve one day as well. I really do. But I like we both know, being having a close connection to this landscape, it can cost tens of millions of dollars to train some of these models, right? And and we're not even talking about GPT or any of those sorts of things. Like this is big money, and that is for, I would say, most of the burgeoning biotech companies that have the right data, they have the sort of like foundations in place. That's completely insane for them to want to do that. So it's
It
really
is.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Why your core, you have a core product and core science, and that's your expertise. Why would you, as that company, go and like train hundreds of thousands of dollars, in this model, build up a team, in the same way that you may have a CRO go and do some of your assays, for instance, like there really needs to be a place for AI CROs to go and do some of that work where, like the economies of scale can apply. And so the cost of doing that work is less.
And I think again, this gives people, like you said, you can make it to the next milestone, right? Like we can get you there. And hey, if this goes well and you build out a team in the future, then that's like, and you can really implement all of this properly. That's the point of what you do. Like you're trying to give people access to this.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, I think it brings us onto something really important, which is just generally AI drug discovery, and for a lot of people, help understanding what's realistic. So I suppose my question to you is what is, and maybe what is unrealistic, but what is realistic with AI and drug discovery?
So there's a lot of really realistic things. I mean, we can do de novo protein design. You can generate new leads. We can do affinity optimization, things like humanization, predictions of immunogenicity. That's with sort of like off the shelf models,
Right.
right? And that's good for a lot of things. It's good for a lot of companies too, right? Like companies that are involved in, R&D and antibody panning and things like that. But there's also a ton of companies that are creating new products from new science whose problem isn't solved by an
Mm.
off-the-shelf model today, right? If that company, if some off-the-shelf model solved that problem, that company wouldn't exist
Yeah.
to try and create a product, right, to solve that problem.
Yeah.
So, and this is sort of one of the things that people are starting to recognize. I think when I first started, fundraising for BioLM, I think it was early last year, I would say, the word AI CRO, and people would kind of look at me like, what's that? Like AI CRO, and now I just spoke with a new investment fund that closed in San Francisco, where they're specifically focused on tech bio companies doing service plays as AI CROs. So
Yeah.
I've become a thing that people have recognized that, hey, all of these new companies are going to have a need for AI. It's going to be unsolved. They're going to have trouble getting talent, which is what they cite, in the Benchling State of Tech and Biopharma report. And AI CROs are potentially going to be there to fill that gap.
Yeah. And do you think then, because it's changing all the time, and what might be out next week might be completely different to what's out this week, and next year 100%, in the next 10 years absolutely, but in terms of, I guess, like an AI drug and getting there, what how are we going to get there? What sort of timelines are people operating on? And for the companies that you work with, the experience you've got, do you think we're at a point where that is realistic now, or have we still got a lot of problems to get over?
I mean, first of all, I'd ask what's the goal? Like, what are
Yeah,
we trying to do here? Is it design an AI drug to design an AI drug? Like, what's the point?
right.
Are we trying to design a drug that is difficult to target with current methods? Potentially, like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of already been done. I mean, I've worked on probably 14 or 15 antibodies, all where some sequence involves some sort of AI ML.
Yeah,
So I mean, it's being used in various ways. Um, but do we want to just pull out like a new sequence out of a hat and have it work? Like, is that the goal to save the time? I think we're still a long ways off from that. It's very challenging. There's always going to be a need to validate the model. There's always going to need to be a need to go to the wet lab and collect some data. And so even if you do have this scenario where, okay, a model has a very high success rate, say in creating a new drug for a specific kind of drug, say it's an antibody for a specific kind of cancer, right? You've got this model that can do de novo prediction very well. You still got to go and test it and then maybe fine tune it. So like all the traditional data science methods are still going to be there. There's still going to be like some traditional wet lab stuff involved. Um, and so I don't know whether or not that molecule is even better than say just doing it like the old-fashioned way, just like doing antibody panning. So I think we just maybe it's possible, but I just don't know if that's the goal. Like I'm not pursuing that to pursue it. Like if a company has a problem like finding a target, then it's like, yeah, we gotta then maybe we can have a de novo therapeutic conversation. But otherwise, like go do some panning, get a whole bunch of data, and that probably takes like 2 weeks versus you trying to design and synthesize a whole bunch of things with AI, and then you have to go specifically print all of that. It's going to be very expensive because you're saying like make exactly this, make exactly what that model designed versus just going and doing like traditional biological panning or something like that.
So just think in any sort of like form of period of innovation, right? Whether it's like transport, for example. Initially, they're so expensive. They take, they're just okay. These niche cases, like you said, there are cases where these things have been done, and we've sequenced these antibodies with, like you did it personally, right? There are other companies as well. Like as we both know, names in the industry, different companies that are getting to the point, reaching the later stages in clinical trials. But that sort of all-round use case, the car that you can just drive anywhere, right? And not this thing that you have to, that's just out of the reach of the normal person. In this case, biotechnology company. Yeah, that's not realistic right now, is it? And it's interesting because it's easy to get carried away, isn't it? And
It
I bet you
really
see
is.
that a lot.
I see it, and I get and I understand why. I see the desire. I see a lot of biologists trying to use machine learning, to create new molecules. And I think the parallel that I draw is, first of all, I'd say it's a tool, right? And that's important to note what you're saying, right? That it's not like the model's not going to solve all the problem. It's a tool, and the skill and the results come from the hands that wield the tool, not the tool itself,
Exactly.
right? And if I'm, say, a biologist and I go and try to use a model and it's not working, or maybe I don't understand what it's trained on, and that the molecule I'm working on is slightly different than the training data set, or I've got to tweak something, then there's going to be issues. And the parallel is like I wouldn't I if a scientist asked me to go run their protocol in a lab, I can go and do it. Sure. I mean, I've been in the wet lab like before, but if something goes wrong, can I debug it? Will I have any ability to advise somebody on like how well this protocol fits for, some other question? No. And so it's very parallel in that way, about using these models, using these bio AI models, in biotech.
We actually talked just before we started recording this as well about the intersection of machine learning and biology, and making sure they do intersect, because there was a bit of a, I think it happens, doesn't it? Like you said, it's easy to get carried away. It's easy to say, hey, we're just gonna sort of brute force this with machine learning, and people are doing that, and people are making great progress doing that. But that's not what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about what's realistic, what teams can do. Um, and a lot of them fail, don't they? Because they don't, there's not that intersection, both sides of the coin working together. So I suppose
Yeah, what's and the intersection with the business need too. That's a thing you keep coming back to. How many companies
100%.
care that you can pull a new protein to, out of a hat to bind to something? I can guarantee you, like way more of the companies have a different problem. They're like, I need AI to help with something different, So
Yeah,
it's cool. It's a great goal, but you got to think about the full landscape. There's a very long tail in terms of what's needed in the industry, that isn't going to be helped by sort of de novo protein design.
yeah, absolutely. And again, bringing it back to BioLM, and this is, I think, this is particularly relevant because we're specifically talking about like what is realistic for teams in biotechnology companies to do with AI, right? To build drugs, right? To help people, to reduce suffering, to all these things. Um, and it's clear at the moment that not a lot of these small, especially these smaller companies, that what might have some success with traditional methods, right? They very well might do, and we've seen loads of companies do that. Um, you can help give them that sort of first leg in, right? And help them that. So yeah, that's it. All goes full circle, and if you can do it and make it cost effective, allow them to get it done, then I suppose that's what's realistic for them now.
Yeah.
But
Most
on a
most of them have the ability to reduce their costs in some
For
way.
sure.
they're doing a repeatable process, and that's, that's the goal for some. For others, the goal is like a better molecule, for instance, but for others, it's let me reduce the cost of my regular processes.
What would you say is the most common, when you go in there and you say, we can reduce the cost? What's the biggest thing that you see with a lot of these smaller biotechs? Where's like the one place that they can, yeah, really sort of save a lot of their money?
Well, a lot of them are doing discovery in some sort of way. Whether it's, a protein, whether it's an enzyme, whether it's some sort of molecule. Most of them are like, there's this large space of possibilities of things that they can go and test, and of things that might work for the problem they're trying to solve. Um, and they have to go and do some sort of, they create their own assay, right? And so they have this repeated assay data, or they're using, somebody's assay. And so we can really just go and in a lot of cases save on the cost of the reagents, the cost of running an assay. You've got synthesis costs in there. You've got labor cost for, time that it takes to actually discover the thing that works. Like if we can reduce that, even better, right? And that's sort of like the kind of what everybody's looking for and wanting and hoping. It's like AI, yeah, could it do really, really well? Sure, maybe. We don't know, but it's probably at least going to do as good as what you're doing right now, right? So it's like, how do we get you that chance to get a leg up with AI without like taking too much of a commitment?
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose while we're here, we might as well posit on the sort of, I don't know, moonshot question of AGI and biological problems, because it's a point we don't know. We simply do not know. And again, you see it all the time. I don't know, there's people at OpenAI, have they cracked AGI, and it's just, and then all the other companies like SSI, Anthropic, all of those kind. And there are people doing that in biotech as well, as both know. I'm coming from the point of view of somebody that really hopes it can and really would love it to be. I saw a report, by the way, Nikhil, about, I think it was in 2022 or 2021. It's before GPT and the sort of foundation models just went everywhere. And
Yeah.
it said that by 2030, the FDA, and I will find a source for this as well, but it said that by 2030, the FDA predict that almost all of the drugs that are being designed after 2030 will not just have AI somewhere in the process, right? Not like I don't know, a sort of classical ML algorithm helping to optimize a process somewhere, but will, in the fundamental design of the compounds themselves, it will be fundamental to how they're done. That's like a big game changer. But you can think bigger as well, right? There are so many more problems it can solve. So my question is, do you think we'll get to a point where AGI, and we're going to have to presume it gets to AGI, right? We're going to have to make that assumption. But do you think we'll get to the point where it can solve like the most pressing biological problems that we have?
I think there's a lot of focus on the biological like healthcare problem,
Right.
I think yeah, maybe we might get there. I wonder if we're gonna be alive long enough, if climate won't kill us first, for instance,
Right.
right? So, talk about other opportunities elsewhere. It's like, we've seen and worked with companies doing synbio for climate change, things like
Right.
carbon capture. Materials science, creating materials like nylon and things like that,
Yeah.
to manufacturing, agriculture. So I think my hope is that, yeah, people will sort of broaden the scope of the goals of this. I think it's a very nice goal to have like AGI create the new therapeutics and all that sort of stuff. But if the world is like burning up, then what's the point in curing cancer? So like the fire is going to get you, or the flood's going to get you. So um,
It's a good point.
there's that sort of thing. And there's something else I was going to say, as well. Oh, yeah. So the FDA, great. I agree with them. All the drugs, yeah, they'll have some AI component, but who's going to do that? And
Yeah.
who's going to have who's going to be manufacturing those? It's going to be mostly the large companies,
Yeah.
right? And like it was very clear to me, my time in like a larger company, like it takes a lot of capital in order to test these things, create the teams, synthesize molecules, et cetera, et cetera. So um, I don't know what that means for like the rest of the industry. If say the companies that have the capital to do the AI ML and create the data sets that are needed in order to train and do this de novo design, like if they're just keeping it private,
Yeah.
I don't think that's a great situation. So, I'm trying to combat that a little bit.
Absolutely agree. Again, side note, it's why almost 2,000 of the top biological scientists in the world wrote an open letter to DeepMind on that very subject. But on the
Yes.
large companies in the capital, one of the things that is most shocking for a lot of people is if you think about some of the biggest funding rounds for AI companies, right? You know, again, there's AI bio with companies like Zero Therapeutics raising $1 billion, but you just look at the life sciences companies, right? Just life sciences, not even AI bio companies, but the traditional biotech companies that are building therapeutics. The money it takes is astronomical, right? There are these 70-person startups in all over Massachusetts that are regularly pulling in 300, 400 million funding rounds, right? This
Oh
happens
yeah.
like every month. So you're right. Who's going to be doing this? Because not everybody has access to that sort of
Oh yeah.
cash. You've got to get there as well.
I think in the founder circles, I think everybody in biotech really does talk about how it's probably the most capital intensive type of business to try and start, and that's difficult for fundraising. You have to keep a very specific pace going.
Yeah.
So, and I think even these companies that have raised a lot of money will, just because they raised a lot of money doesn't mean they don't have big expenses.
Yeah, if you look at OpenAI. Netflix as well. Like, look at Netflix. I mean, they just you forget how much and maybe not Netflix, not the best example, but they still don't run at a profit, right? But OpenAI,
It's funny,
right?
like what are we chasing if we're spending as much money funding the AI as it takes to fund the traditional biotech companies, you know?
Yeah, that's the point. But it honestly, it's crazy. And I suppose you made another point as well. Can AGI solve our bio problems? Well, are we even going to get there? Right? There are some other pressing problems. I was personally shocked at how little companies are doing. Like, okay, generative material science as well, but all of these other things as well. And there are companies that are kind of trying to do a bit of both. Like Evolution Scale is a good example, right? Because not only is like the therapeutic aspect, but there's also the carbon capture aspect as well, which is really interesting. But there are there aren't many companies just focusing on those other sectors, right?
Right.
Is that because of the lack of capital incentive? Like, what is it?
That's what I say. I mean,
Right.
that's my opinion. I think, especially if you're going to raise money, you're going to need to demonstrate at least like $1 billion potential market
Yeah.
for VCs, right? And that's not going to come from some like nascent, manufacturing of like a carbon capture or, like that will definitely help, but you're not
Yeah.
going to get a huge slice of the pie from therapeutics essentially. And so we've worked with companies doing enzymes, doing material stuff, as well as antibodies, and it's tough for the companies doing enzymatic work and doing non-therapeutics. To be honest, from what I see, I think they often have to sell differently, sell directly
Yeah.
to industry, which is sort of a different animal, stepping into kind of another industry selling, and yeah, I think it's challenging. I wish there was more of a capital incentive, but I do see a lot of VCs and funds sort of starting and converging around funding things like climate change with science,
Yeah.
funding things like agriculture with science, and synthetic biology. So I think there will be more in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to. it's hard to detach, and this is something that is well outside the scope of this conversation, but to detach the politicization of these things and how it's affected and hype generally. But I suppose it's a good thing to have a race to the bottom with foundation models and machine learning in biology, right? And like, it's a good thing, we have these companies training these mega models, because if they succeed, that's great for everybody. If they crack something that people haven't been able to crack, right? If it takes you $500 million of GPU usage and an immense amount of energy to build something that can actually just pull these sequences out of a hat, right? And they get through and they make it, then we've all won. But even if they don't, if they land on these incremental changes that helps the companies that, like that BioLM work with, and it helps them figure this out quicker, and it helps get therapeutics to market quicker, and it helps push the needle on the other industries that you mentioned. Like, it's all a good thing, isn't it? But can AGI solve our bio problems? I don't know.
It's tough. It's like how much would you rely on ChatGPT for writing your email? Maybe it's going to craft something, but is there always going to be human review? I think the same may apply, but maybe in a tougher way or a stronger way in biotech.
Yeah,
Perhaps we've yet to see.
yeah, absolutely. And on the just on the other things you mentioned, climate change, talk about like generative enzyme design, for example. Yeah, I know a few companies that do that kind of stuff. And it's funny, as we talked about the capital incentive, but like, there's a huge capital incentive for people to want to invest in that, isn't there? Like, realistically, if you can design an enzyme that helps with the degradation of plastic, if you can solve that problem, right? Think about how much space you can save and land you can save. So, what do you think this kind of human touch thing around therapeutics and how it affects us? I don't know what it is.
I think I agree with like, yeah, breaking down plastics. I think it's a fantastic application. It's one that we've worked on as well.
Right.
But those people have to find the plastic.
Yeah.
They have to, are there recycling companies out there that have like their specific plastic that they can break down? Is that recycling company sorting it, or does that company care whether or not it's coming from an enzyme or some sort of chemical to break? No. So, what do? You're a biotech company, and now you're also having your own recycling facility, and while you're doing R&D, and it's like, so I think politicization, just like logistics in other areas, I think generally the population wants these things better, climate change, environment, foods that's not so tough on resources, things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't make it into like legislation all the
Yeah.
time, right? And so until we have like a ton of support there's not a whole lot of incentive, and you're kind of going against the grain, really.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the last interesting thing for me to talk about here is it just, I mean, again, we're jumping through a lot of hoops, but if we're talking about AGI solving biological
It's a
problems,
dance.
yeah,
Call it a dance.
but AGI solving biological problems, and just again, brief definition: AGI, artificial general intelligence, something that we believe can solve tasks without any instruction, generalized tasks across many different areas, and sometimes outperform humans in a way that we didn't think was possible. Um, does it that can be a bit dangerous in biology as well, right? There's going to be some concerns there. Do you ever think about that kind of stuff as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was a big part of creating Twist's biosecurity system, and sort of stayed involved in biosecurity, kept up with it after I left, and it's not new. It's not a new problem. I'll say that. Like, AI or machine learning are not creating a new potential for somebody to create an artificial virus. That was already there, right? So, um, does it maybe give more people access, or does it give people the ability to conceal threats? Potentially. I think it's going to be this like cop and robber game
100%.
where you just, the technology increases in one way, and then the biosecurity screening has to increase its technology in order to catch that, right? And then, um, so, you know, thus far we haven't seen any sort of synthetic biology. Like somebody can just go grab anthrax. Why would I go through the whole process of like
True.
designing a de novo protein and like, getting it to the lab? It's like just go get some, uh, the seed that for the oil.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
is
yeah,
the
yeah.
seed that usually is used in oil that like is poisonous? Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So I, I think it would be maybe an overblown concern.
Interesting. Because a lot of people do worry about it. They release barometers, as Canadian research company, every year about how it's like a barometer of trust, and AI just consistently ranks right at the bottom every single time. And we know that. Like, we know partially why that is the case because how that's propagated and relayed back to people, but also I like there are legitimate concerns for sure, right? You see it in other areas of machine learning, which isn't related to biology. We talk about deep fakes, right? We talk about um, the spread of misinformation. We talk about cybersecurity and all that kind of stuff. But I think it is at least good to know that maybe we're not actually that close to AGI doing complete biological processes because that would be a little bit scarier. There are thoughts about that being scary, right? We talked about what's realistic, so that's a good. It's a good thing ultimately, and it's a good thing as well that there are companies that have been like truly sensible about how they do this, right? Like setting up biosecurity groups within a company,
Oh
and
yeah,
also
there's biosecurity at the government level now for synthetic biology. There's the IGSC, the International Genes, Security. What is it? Look it up. The consortium of synthesis companies that
yeah,
screen DNA. Um, so it's definitely on the radar and in consideration. But yeah, like I said, if you want to, it's very difficult, cost intensive, to design like a new, say, pathogen, for instance,
yeah.
for curing something that exists already.
It's a really good point. That's a lot of money. Well, that's a good thing. And well, Nickel, this has been a really interesting conversation. Like it really has, and
Agreed.
we've covered a lot of different things. It's tradition for us to, and I didn't prep you on this, but it's a tradition for us to ask you to ask a question for the next guest, who is going to be something to do with machine learning and biology.
I mean, I could say something silly like, "What's your favorite ice cream?" But I want to make it more interesting than that. You know? Um, what's your favorite part about what you do? What keeps you going? Like, why do you keep doing it? You know?
That's a great question.
Like, yeah.
That's an awesome question.
I know because for me, I've realized I love building things and I love solving problems and challenges. And so it definitely keeps me in this field. But I know that people have other motivation. I mean, I've met people that want to solve the ailment that their parents had,
Yeah, me too.
and that's why they're pursuing that career,
That's a
versus
really
somebody
great
who's
point.
just like interested in computers. So I'd be curious.
Such a range of answers for that as well. You could get
Yeah,
an any answer, but okay. Well, that is a fantastic question. And
thank
Nicole,
you.
it's been absolutely fantastic. Really, really enjoyed this. We've talked about some stuff that I'm really passionate about and that I care deeply about as well. So thank you very, very much for spending the time talking with me today. It's been great. Any last parting words from you?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I'm glad we were able to set it up. I'm sure we'll be keeping in touch. It was a fun conversation, like it's been always, and yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Sure.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.